excited. My guest today is Vitaliy Katsenelson, a Denver-based value investor, author, writer, born in Russia, made in America, as he says. Forbes magazine called him the new Benjamin Graham. I've enjoyed his writing for many years and got to see him in Omaha and at Value X over the last few years. Today we're talking about his last book, Soul in the Game, The Art of a Meaningful Life. Vitaliy, how are you? So good to see you.
Oh, Bogumil, it's such a pleasure. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
You know that I have a million questions, and you might know that I like to kick off those conversations with the early days. And you made it easy for me because you talk about the early days, your childhood in the book. But for the benefit of the audience, can you share some of those colorful stories from the early days and how you think that those times shaped you and maybe even the career path that you chose?
Interesting. So I was born in Russia, in Soviet Russia, and I was born in the town in the northwest Russia called Murmansk. Most American listeners and viewers will probably remember the movie The Hunt for the Red October. Well, Murmansk was where that Red October came from. Obviously, it's a fictional submarine and it's not real, but if it was real, it would have come from Murmansk. So it's a very long winters, very cold winters, very short summers. And at the time, Russia was Soviet Russia, so it was command control economy. And I'm sure very similar to your life
Yep.
in Poland, some bureaucrat in a indiscreet building in Moscow was deciding what the prices of potatoes and ketchups. I mean, not ketchup, I guess. We didn't have ketchup. Maybe so it was supposed to be an eggs. So therefore, my parents, especially my mom, was constantly obsessed about what we're gonna eat because there was, the shelves were bare, for the most time, at the stores. So there was a plenty of scarcity, when I grew up. But so when we I moved to the United States in 1991 with my whole family. I was 18 years old. And when I moved to the United States, I actually got to appreciate that, I went from scarcity to abundance. And it was a very interesting experience. And I think being in it, I would not change a single thing in my life. I would not change, kind of been born in Soviet Union, and I would not change, obviously, coming to the United States. And what I really appreciate is something that's in between. It's the contrast. It's the contrast of growing up in this command-controlled economy. And by the way, I have a kind of a special message for all the listeners, especially the younger ones, who want to try the socialism thing.
Mm-hmm.
Here's my message to them: socialist is an incredible equalizer of poverty, and you experience it as well. So and I know this because I would argue that when we moved to the United States, all of us had minimum wage jobs. And we were probably the bottom 10 or 20% of kind of income earners in the United States. And I tell you, that's what basically everybody in Russia lived like.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, no, I would argue, no, actually, Steven said differently. My life in the United States, when we just came here, when we just all of us had minimum wage jobs, was much easier and better than life of 99.9% of population of Soviet Russia. So if you ever have a choice between capitalism and socialism, it's not a choice. Just, really, it's just, choose capitalism. But anyway, I think so being an immigrant really shaped me as an individual. And I think probably you could relate to this as an immigrant as well, probably charged your batteries to work harder than everybody else just because a contrast that you kind of experience through your life. Yes, well, let me ask a question. What was your experience like?
I love hearing your perspective, and I love that part of your book. The reason why I loved it is I think it should be talked about and it should be written about because these are the lessons that are easily forgotten. And you're right that the younger generation might hear ideas about socialism and communism, and they all sound beautiful on paper. Let's all have the same. Let's all work for the greater good. And we know how it actually looks in practice. In practice, it's a failed system that actually deprives you of most basic freedoms of expressing yourself in economically speaking in any other way, which leads to massive shortages and an absurd lifestyle where you have to line up for basic goods that you need at home, not even luxuries of any kind. And the paradoxes of the system are almost incomprehensible. You can watch movies and you can read books, but unless you've lived through it, and reading your book, it rhymes with my experience of 1980s Poland, you just can't explain it. What really shocked me, and I'll mention it briefly, is that on my path, I went to schools in Brussels and Paris was the one that kind of shocked me a bit because it was a good grad school, and half of my teachers were teaching political science, half were teaching business. The business ones came from London and New York, and they were very open-minded. They were teaching us anything else you would learn, anything at Harvard or anywhere else. But the political science teachers were what I would call believers in a system that I experienced as a kid. And they were trying to convince me that Poland got it wrong, that if they did communism in France, they would have done a better job. And I thought that you just can't argue with that kind of ideology. And I told them, listen, Germany, the same country, same nation, half of it was under one system, half was under the other. If you actually want to have a real life experience, you know what East Germany produced, a Trabant. I actually sat in one as a kid, and I know what kind of crappy car it is. And West Germany produced BMWs and Mercedes. I mean, how long do you want to argue? But I think if it's something that you believe in, it's almost like it's a religious belief. You can't argue with people about it. That's what I found.
So you know, it's kind of interesting. So in the book, I talk about how I want to be more European. And I think you know, like one of the questions you wanted to ask me about this as well, kind of European versus American. And if you think of a caricature of two, like kind of Europe, like Western Europe, let's take France, actually. I'm going to focus on France right now, and America. The caricature of America, that's probably the caricature that you and I saw when we lived in under Soviet regime, was basically, it's a kind of constant rat race, and you eat McDonald's at your desk, this kind of thing, and all you think about is money, and you think about is working. And then on the other side, you have these Europeans who have this very like tax to death, but they kind of they live, they work to live, not live to work. And it's a kind of, you know, and like, and whenever I go to Europe, I see this. You go to France and you go to Hapa's house and you see these people sitting and drinking this espresso for 2 hours and drinking newspaper. And when first time I saw that, I was very critical of them. And then I realized, actually, no, I want this in my life too. Because either extreme is actually bad for your life. And I'll talk about France in a second. But like, I want to have some European in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because if I only focus on work, there was a lot more to life than just work. And this is coming from somebody who loves investing. For me, it's not really work, it's my hobby. I just get paid for it.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, and this is where it becomes important, if you do this, you're going to have a very incomplete and very, I guess, yeah, very incomplete life. So what I started doing on purpose, Wednesdays became my European days. Okay. On Wednesdays, my calendar is blacked out. If you want to schedule anything with me on Wednesday, it's impossible because just it's it's blacked out. So I on Wednesday I can go see a movie. Sometimes I have a 3 hour lunch with a friend of mine. It's my day, and that's a day where I can do anything. I can go to the coffee shop and be European for a day, and I can if I liked espresso, I would have drunk espresso, read newspaper. Now, but I also did more than that. I also every day I will make sure I walk outside for an hour.
Mm-hmm.
I like Wednesday and Friday I have a scheduled appointment with a trainer. I have 3 kids. My 2 oldest are out of the house. That but my youngest one is 11 years old, and I drive her to school every single day. And this is the highlight of my day to drive her to school. On Friday nights we have family dinner. That's my wife's achievement, not mine. But the point is, that's kind of forcing kind of life into my life. being more European. Now, the problem, like you mentioned France, and let me tell you the interesting story. Um, One of our largest positions in our portfolio is Dassault Aviation, company
Mm-hmm.
that makes fighter jets, but they also make planes, Gulfstream like planes. And France is kind of a unique situation when it comes to military equipment because they have a very neutral foreign policy.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you have India or Indonesia and they want to buy fighter jets. They can buy from America, Lockheed or whoever makes them, F-35 or F-16s, whatever, or they can buy them from Dassault, from France. If they buy, let's say, F-16s, and United States want to have influence Chinese policy through Indonesia,
Mm-hmm.
they can use carrot or a stick. A stick would be saying, listen, we sold you those F-16s, but if you don't do what we tell you, we're not going to provide you parts for them.
Right.
So what happens? So the reason I'm telling you this, there was a significant demand for the Dassault's fighter jets because France doesn't do that,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore and right now we are in this world where geopolitics is going crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Like the India, Indonesia, and many Saudi Arabia they want to buy fighter jets. They don't want to just buy them from the United States. Russia does not have any fighter jets to sell because they're busy. So there's huge demand for fighter jets, and I was talking to the source management. I was asking, why aren't you selling more of them? They said, well, it's very simple. The we if we hire more people to build these jets, and the demand declines, we can't lay them off. So
Right.
most people in France, basically there's some kind of union contract, basically under some kind of union arrangement. Okay, so in France, politicians they had a great insight. They said, "Wow, what if we make it very difficult for employers to fire people?" So their
Mm-hmm.
thinking was they're gonna protect, kind of working class. Well, what they did actually, they killed the economy. They
Yeah.
actually put brakes on the economy because if you know that you're gonna hire this person, you cannot lay them off. You're just gonna not gonna hire them.
Mm-hmm.
And this is exactly kind of the second order effects you were talking about, right? Because this is the second order effects that actually you may have had a good intention.
Mm-hmm.
And when you gave a political speech, you were saying how you're protecting workers. And
Mm-hmm.
then at the day, you actually hurt those workers. And this is what happens a lot of times when government intervenes in trying to fix the economy. That's how they break it.
You're touching on so many fascinating topics, and I'll mention, just it goes without saying, any stocks we bring up in this conversation are no recommendations. Do your own research, but I'll mention it for the
Absolutely.
benefit. So first, you said about the two continents kind of learning from each other, and I wholeheartedly agree. I manage money for wealthy families, and quite a few of them are on both sides of the Atlantic, so they're in Europe and the U.S. And I notice how the U.S. is driven by wealth creation, and
Mm-hmm.
Europe is driven by wealth preservation. There are a lot of
Mm-hmm.
families that have had wealth for a long time in Western Europe, excluding the
Yeah.
Soviet bloc, of course, for various reasons. It was impossible to maintain your wealth. But I think two continents can learn from each other. So as much as Europe could learn a bit more about creating wealth in this new world, I think the US can learn from Europeans a long-term, a century-long way of thinking about wealth. It's something that I witnessed working with some families, that they really think in terms of a true long-term, 100 years, what's the vision? And I think in the US, we have this idea, which we all cherish, that you can get rich within one lifetime. What's next? And I think that's interesting because Europe has experienced the what's next over multiple generations and created this culture of stewardship of capital. And you were referring to the fact that in Paris you see people having coffee in the middle of the day, enjoying their life. So that's true too. And I think we can also learn from Europeans how to spend the time and the money once we have it, instead of just thinking about work. I agree. And the bigger topic of geopolitics, I think it's fascinating how those companies that you mentioned can have this unique position that American companies might not. Usually it's the American companies that have an advantage in the world because everybody wants American brands and so on. But in some cases, it's actually a European player or maybe an Asian player that can have an advantage over an American player because of the politics not being as involved in the existence of
Yeah,
the
but
business.
yeah.
I want to ask you a question that I asked you actually in Omaha 2 years ago at Guy Spears Value X. And for the benefit of the audience, I'd love to hear your answer. I asked you about the way you write. And I told you that when I read your writing, I see this courage to write in a certain way. There's a lot of you in the writing, and I love it. And I think it allows me and the reader to get to know you. And these are articles that you could only write, which is fairly unique in this world where it feels like, you know, there's a lot of stuff written and anybody could have written it. Your writing is only Vitaliy's writing. Tell me about the source of that courage to go out and write this way.
So it's very easy and very difficult at the same time. It's very easy because when I write, like the person you see in front of you, the person you're gonna read. There's no duality. What you read is what you get. It's difficult because it took me many years to get to the self-confidence to write that way. And the way I got there is if I was just writing and my articles went out and I would never get feedback from readers, I would not become the writer I am today. Like whenever I would write articles and that voice and authenticity would kind of come through, and I would suddenly get a flood of emails, people appreciate it, and they gave me the confidence just to keep being myself.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting part is this: I was told that I break a lot of writing rules,
Mm-hmm.
and I may be doing this. I'm just not aware of this because there was this great comedian from Europe. His name was Victor Borge. He
Mm-hmm.
said, "This is your language. I'm just trying to use it." So the reason I bring this up because I really never. The only class I failed that I had to retake at University of Colorado Denver was English class because I was a kind of newly minted immigrant and I must learn English. So I never. Today if I were to take a writing class, it probably would ruin me. There is this great European composer Hector Berlioz who wrote Symphonie Fantastique. And what's amazing about him that he received very little formal music training. And he wrote Symphonie Fantastique without the training. And that symphony broke all the rules. Like it was one of the first symphonies that basically was a program symphony where it basically told a story. Like it's done in opera, but it's never been done in a traditional kind of orchestra music.
Right.
But the reason he broke all the rules because he did not know that.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the reason I write the way I write is because there was a lot of rules I'm breaking. I'm not sure. I'm not aware of what those rules are. So that's how it came about.
I think it's very refreshing, very authentic in a world where I think we lack that. So I love reading anything you put out there, and I think you have your special audience that appreciates this way of writing. And in many ways, I think you gave me courage to write in that way too, and include myself in the writing and make my articles and any writing that I do more me, which is it feels uncomfortable because you feel like it makes you vulnerable in a way. But then I think it explains why I invest the way I invest, why I think the way I think, why I consider risks in a certain way, because of my personal experience, and I can't hide it. This is who I am, and it made me.
Oh, absolutely.
Vitaliy, I want to ask you about the big topic. So the soul in the game, the concept itself. And reading your book second time around, I was thinking to myself, and it's a question for you too, isn't this the only game worth playing? And then I was thinking it's a game that you can't lose at the same time. The soul in the game concept.
Yeah. So let me explain what soul in the game is. And this is kind of interesting. It took me. I finally figured it out after I wrote that book and after I talked so much about it. there is one word that it really, it really describes it. And that word is alignment. It's alignment of your why you're doing things and what you're doing. So like my why, like, okay, I'll give you an example. I love value investing. I love investing, period. But let's say I decide, like for financial reasons, I decided to become a financial planner. Something I can't stand. Like there's nothing wrong with financial planning. It's just for me, it's like going to dental school or going to a dentist. That's how much I love, financial planning. But let's say that's what I was doing. If with my love for investing, I was doing financial planning, I would have been so miserable. Actually, let me give you this example. This is one of my favorite cartoons of all time is the Fantasia 2000, which is a Disney's kind of classical music cartoon. And there is a little episode there about Rhapsody in Blue, Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, and there is a character there who is working with jackhammer, and he's dreaming about being a drummer at the jazz club, and
Right.
being a drummer. So he's applying jackhammer, but he wants to be drummer. There is a person who doesn't have soul in the game. He's miserable. So if I kind of basically in anything you're doing having an alignment, you're right. That's the game you can't lose, because first of all, if that alignment is there, you're probably gonna work so much harder than anybody else because of the alignment. And like, listen, we're only given one life. We're only given so many hours, and the more time we spend outside of that alignment, I would argue that's the time we kind of squandering.
Listening to you, I'm thinking that you and I are very lucky. And I mentioned it to you before we started recording that I was a student in Brussels and I picked up a book, One Up on Wall Street by Peter Lynch. And I mentioned it in a TED talk that I gave a few years ago. And until then, I studied business, economics, finance. I took accounting courses, but it wasn't all adding up. Like, how am I going to use it? And picking up that book, I mentioned to you that I thought I could do this. But when I said that, I didn't mean I'll beat the market, I'll become the richest person in the world. I was thinking this is intellectually stimulating, and it's a puzzle worth solving. And it's something I could actually do over a lifetime, hopefully. And I didn't know where it's going to take me. And then I came to New York and found a job in the investment profession, and everything else followed. But I just fell in love with the idea of looking for businesses and owning them over long periods of time and just figuring them out, because there are new ones that show up. There are new business models. It's a never-ending pursuit. And then if you expand beyond one country, there are even more businesses to look at. I just thought that this is an open-ended pursuit that I
think
can't
this
lose,
is
in the sense that I'll never get bored.
one of the competing title for Soul Game was A Student of Life. And in fact, that was working title for the book, this Student of Life. And I think that concept of being a student of life is so dear to me as well, because this is kind of the beauty of investment profession, right? Especially if you're a generalist, because you can be learning about so many different things. I'm kind of mentally going through our portfolio right now, and I'm thinking, like, there is a drug distributor, there's a lot of defense companies, an oil company, there is a there's a ride sharing, all these different industries I get to learn. And the beauty of this is that of investing is that your interaction with the world in general kind of add to that knowledge that you'll be able to apply somewhere else. Let me tell you a story. This is kind of interesting. I just came back from CEA, Consumer Electronics Show from Las Vegas. And the reason I went there because I kind of realized that it's so easy to get stuck in the past, like, because as a value investor, you're looking for things that aren't devalued.
Yeah.
But I want to make sure that I'm also forward-looking as well, because part of the value is growth, right? And also we live in a world today where there's a lot of threats coming from different directions.
Mm-hmm.
And So we were going through the show, and I gotta describe the show to you. It's imagine there are 5 convention centers, like a full size convention center. Like take a convention center in New York or Chicago,
Mm-hmm.
but except there are 5 of them, and they're all connected to each other. Like, and
Massive.
that's not enough. There are 2 floors in Venetian hotels that are taken by the show as well. Just
Wow.
the size of it is just absolutely incredible. But anyway, you walk through this and you get exposed to so much. And I was there with my son, and he wanted to see things, because there's so much to see. And I remember we were having a conversation with the a vendor who was selling, who was showing the technology translation. Like, you basically, there is a small device look like this. You put a headphone on, I put a headphone on, and we talk in different languages and we get a translation.
Wow.
So which is great. But the problem was a 15 to 20-second delay. And I asked them why there is a delay. They said, well, because it has to go to the cloud, it has to come back. And that actually, that was a kind of a throwaway conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was kind of, let's say, there were a lot more impressive things at the show than that.
Mm-hmm.
But what I realized, like days after that, oh, so this is what actually if you think about AI,
Mm-hmm.
what is actually happening in inference. You think about, let me give you an example to explain to the listener and to viewer what's happening. Think about self-driving car for a second.
Right.
Tesla, they spend billions of dollars training the algorithm or it could be almost like a large language model for what to do in different situations. That's the training. But the inference actually on your car is happening when you're driving, because the data comes in, processes on the hard drive locally, not the hard drive, on the processor locally, and the car responds. That's not going to the cloud, because if that happened, it would have been explaining the accidents after they happened. So because it would take half a second or a second, the delay is deadly. So now one thing, this little example with translator made me realize how important inference this kind of this
Mm-hmm.
happen for the inference to happen in the local processor.
Mm-hmm.
It made me realize, I have to spend a lot more time now looking at processors on phones. Also, DRAM will become a lot more important, because it takes a lot of this. And this, I'm just kind of want to give an example how this throwaway experience, kind of this insignificant experience, if you're mindful of this, actually could give you, could bring you a lot of insights. And so in my case, now I'm looking at companies that manufacture DRAM as an example. And that's the beauty of our business, is that we get to learn so much, and just experiencing the world actually allows you to come up with investment ideas.
In a fascinating way, as an investor, you have this permission to learn and learn anything you want. And you can let your curiosity go places, like you going to this event and asking people random questions. I do it all the time. I'm just curious how people live, because I feel like I have some insight in understanding. I'm not going to try all the products, I'm not going to try all the services, but I can definitely ask everybody in my life about them. And you continue to learn. The other thing you mentioned, I think it's really, really important, I don't want to miss it, is that as a value investor, and I feel like all investing is value investing, as Buffett and Munger told us, we might look like we're looking at the past, but the value gets created in the future. And I want to bring up something that somebody shared with me the other day, which is something I read before, the original Geico article that Buffett wrote when he recommends Geico. I don't know how long ago that was 1950s, I believe. The last sentence of that article, if you want to look it up, in the beginning, he talks about the past, the last decade, and car insurance, what happened. But the last sentence or two, he says, the market is missing the growth opportunity that this stock has. And it's such a powerful revelation, because it's not what Geico is or was, but what Geico could be in that year, 1950 something. And that's where the value got created. And obviously Geico is I don't know how many times bigger than it was back then. But I think as investors, yes, we look at the past to get an idea of what the future could look like, but then looking at the future, where the future is actually taking us, it's a fascinating place to be, to investigate, and to understand the value creation that's coming.
No, I think you're absolutely right. This is not a recommendation. I'm just using it as, we own it. But doesn't mean that anybody who listens to this podcast should own it. But one of our largest positions in the portfolio is Uber stock. And my insights 5 years ago was that I can see how ride sharing is going to be like it's a tsunami you can't stop. And and that's therefore the market is going to become much larger, and Uber is most likely going to be the company that will dominate it. So the difficulty with growth investing, is to actually, it's the difficulty is that you often see the growth runway. It's a place in the bet on the company that will be able, to benefit from this, will be at the finish line.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's the difficulty. And whenever these two things align and you can buy it at reasonable valuation, that becomes, that's what kind of the holy grail of kind of finding companies where a lot of the earnings lie in the future. And when you be buying, statistically, they may look expensive based on backward looking or near term earnings, but it's the finding the ones that you feel they have competitive advantage. It's a good management. All these things together come together. Um, so yes, I agree that the growth is a huge part of the value.
You used the term that I really like, the force you can't stop. Like if you notice something that's happening, for example, paper newspapers going away, we're getting information online, fax machines going away, film cameras going away, and something new gets created. You just can't ignore it. And I think as a value investor, at least some of the people that are thinking of it as a low multiple only investing can get stuck with the businesses of the past. And I met quite a few people that continue to invest in the same businesses they invested when they were in their 20s once they reached their 70s. I think that's what you're doing by going to those events. You want to keep up with the times. You want to see what else is coming, what else is disrupting the businesses that you even own today, and what are the opportunities. The question I would have for you here is, I think of investing, and I'm sure you do too, as profit pools. We're looking for the profit pools. And sometimes the disruption may not create a new profit pool for a while or maybe ever. And
It is what
right? It's tricky. So you might have had a beautiful business like Kodak. It became a verb, it became, and for 100 years it had a massive market share. And then in photography as such, as far as I understand, we have not created a profit pool the same way Kodak has. We have more photographs, pictures than ever before, but there's no profit pool as such. Unless I'm wrong, you can correct me.
No, I think I was gonna say, I read somewhere that Smith Corona looked the cheapest right before it. Smith Corona was the word processor before, that's what people use. This is kind of think about it as a kind of a hybrid between a typewriters and a computer.
Right.
So they had their own kind of hybrid, kind of word processor, and it looked the cheapest, right? Just a few years before it went out of business. No, I think this is the tricky part with where we are today, because what's happening with AI, it's a change that we never, I think the rate of change is probably the fastest that we ever have experienced. Because when the wheel, when the wheel was created, it didn't create another wheel, but this one is a AI keeps to accelerate the advance of AI. So it's so as an investor, as an investor, I would argue that betting in the future technology is important, but I think today it's also as important to make sure that whatever you own is not going to be disrupted by AI. And this is so you can argue that I went for CES not just to see the future growth, but also to make sure that whatever I own is not going to be, the chopping block by AI.
Disrupted. It's
Yeah.
it's fascinating. Vitali, I want to ask you about time and money. It's something that you write about in the book, and I'm fascinated with the two topics because some people say time is money, money is time. I think in Zurich, when you walk out from the airport, one of the banks has an ad that says time is money, and and I always play with the concept because I'll get to it. But I want to ask you about a quote from your book. You say that you call time the most important, irreplaceable gift, and then you write, "As I get older, I realize that instead of time buying money, money should be buying time." Can you talk about that dance between time and money? Because as investors and as humans, I think we are facing that dilemma more often than we are willing to admit.
I read this quote by Carl that really made me think. I've been thinking about this quote for a long time. And Carl said, "The first 40 years of life is just an experiment. It's just an experiment."
Right.
It's something like this. I'm probably murdering the quote, and I think what happens is this: in the first 40 years of your life, your understanding of time is completely, kind of screwed up. Because when you are 10 years old, this 10 years seems like it's been infinite, and you still
Mm-hmm.
have another 7 or 10 times more, 9 times more ahead of you. When you get at 40, suddenly you realize, oh, this is what 40 years feels like.
Mm-hmm.
And I only have maybe another 40 if I'm lucky. Okay.
Yeah.
And suddenly you start valuing time so much more.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly you start thinking about, am I spending my time wisely? And and now I'm speaking for myself and start to think, how can I buy time? And what I mean by this, I'm not talking about living longer, but I'm talking about how can I spend my days more wisely and
Right.
doing things that are meaningful to me. And by the way, we buy time all the time. So the money buys time. By the way, every single one who is listening to this podcast or viewing it is doing it every day. Every time you go in out to a restaurant,
Yeah.
you're buying time. You're not just buying food because you can go to grocery store, buy the food and cook it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But you're actually buying time. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
time you are saving from not cooking. So we're doing it all the time. So what I try to do in my life, I try to figure out how can I, what things bring me meaning? What are the good problems?
Mm-hmm.
And let me talk about good problems, for a second. So good problems for me, it's very difficult to have a meaningful life and not be solving good problems. Good problems, and they're problems, but they're also good because when you're doing things that give you meaning, a lot of times, like investing, it's a good problem for me.
Mm-hmm.
But as an investor, you're gonna go through ups and downs, and
Mm-hmm.
you will go through downs. Okay, it's impossible not to. So, and when you go through the down times, you're gonna be experiencing pain and everything. But I would not trade it for anything. Being a parent is another good problem for me. Kids bring you a lot of joy and a lot of pain. Okay, so like writing, I love writing, but I cannot tell you how many times I would be still like there were times where for weeks I've been staring at the computer and I had nothing.
Mm-hmm.
See, I tell myself that you know something will show up at some point because I had a history of that, where I went through this before, but it's still painful. So the point I'm trying to make, those are good problems, and this
Mm-hmm.
is the good problems I want to be solving. I can also be mowing alone, or I could be cooking. None of those things bring me joy or get any meaning out of them. So I use money to buy time, so I don't have to. So somebody else is doing that. So now that means also that I have to make other adjustments, and I don't want to get too personal, but in my case, that also meant that we lived in the same house for 20 years. We would buy we would in the past would always buy used cars. So the money be saved from kind of from mortgage payment or uh, interest payments on our cars. That's the money I was able to use to buy time. So that's kind of that's kind of my relationship with money. The way I look at money is, and I spend a lot of time thinking about how to de-emphasize the importance of money in my life. By the way,
Hmm.
this is the money guy say talking, and people are discounted. Um, but I really, the way I look at money is basically, if you have a unlimited amount of water, it's not going to make you any happier.
Right.
Okay, if you are dying of thirst, it's going to be miserable.
Hmm.
So I kind of it's not necessarily symmetrical. Having more does not having having not enough, so you can so you're thirsty. That's one thing. Having a lot of it is not in my case is not going to make me happier. So money, and this probably I have to thank my parents for this. It's never been very important to me. Again, this is a value investor who is
Hmm.
analyzing stocks all the time, who's trying to uncover undervalued investments. But to me, it's puzzle that I love it. It's almost like if you are a sculptor and you work with the rock or whatever, you don't have to fall in love with the rock. You may love the process, but you don't. So just the same thing. Just because the medium of what you and I use is money doesn't mean that I would love this money.
It's fascinating that you put it that way because I realize, and having known many investors that have been doing it for many decades, is that they didn't come to investing for money. Those that stayed and see it as a lifelong pursuit, how funny it sounds, I don't care, but they didn't come here for the money. They came because the pursuit itself was fascinating.
I think when you have soul in the game, money is secondary.
Yeah.
Money is just kind of it's one of the second, or third, or fourth, or fifth thing you think about.
Hmm.
Um, in fact, I would argue when I got into my profession, and I would argue I was naive. I thought I basically before I got into investing, I was going to be a lawyer, I was going to be a manager. I tried so many different majors, and how much money each one makes was not even considering. Was not even consideration because probably I was naive and I was thinking everyone was going to make a lot of money, or enough money so I don't have to think about money. Um, uh, so you're not kind of lucky that we're in a profession that also provides the money, so you don't have so you have enough water, so you're not thirsty.
Hmm.
But I don't wake up in the morning and I don't get motivated, and think about money. It's not a motivation in my life at all.
And I think there might be actually a secret sauce of a successful investor. Because I think if you obsess about the money, I think you're going to be making decisions from a very different framework that may interfere with the results. And I haven't given it enough thought, but when you put it that way, I realize that people that come to investing because they see it as an easy way to make money, seemingly, they're not the ones that stay. That's one observation. But the ones that do stay, money is it's a side effect. And I know very successful investors now in their 80s or 90s that live very, very modest lives, and their net worth could be eye-popping for a lot of people, but
Mhm.
it clearly shows that's not why they stayed for those decades. They just found it really interesting to
Absolutely.
continue to explore and learn. I want to ask you, and it's related to that. You spend a lot of time in the book talking about Stoicism and Epictetus. And speaking of wealth, there's a quote that I really want to bring up. You share it, and it says, wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants.
Mm.
Can you talk about that quote?
Yeah. Just okay. So let's talk about Stoic philosophy, and we'll get to that. I mean, Stoic philosophy is a 2,000-year-old philosophy that started in the ancient Greece, and then moved to Rome. And what I really loved about it when I discovered it, it's almost like I suddenly got this operating system for life.
Hmm.
See, it was no religion attached to it, so it helped me kind of figure out how to deal with daily life. And one of the key concepts, there's a lot of lessons there, but the one that really captured, that's grabbed me into and sucked me into it was the economy of control. And the economy of control sounds extremely simple, but it's incredibly powerful and it's very difficult to actually execute it in daily life. And it basically says this: there are certain things that are up to us. It's our values, it's our decisions, it's how we react to things. And everything else is not up to us. So what does it mean? Well, that means that basically we should spend our energy only focusing on things that are up to us. And when things that are not up to us, either the street lights that come up when you drive into work, or your neighbor being rude to you, or your coworker being rude to you, whatever, or you basically treat it as things you can't control, and you train yourself to basically dismiss them, or just focusing on your reaction, but not let it get to you. So, in other words, you're trying to control the things you can control. Now, by the way, that applies to investing so much. That's probably like Stoicism should be taught at like the second class of value investing, right after margin of safety, because all you can do is focus on the process. Okay, try to get better at valuing companies. Study management, set you have in your process in decision making. How the market is going to price them on a daily basis, completely not up to you. Therefore, not being obsessed about it and upset about it is paramount. I just wrote about this. We had 2024 was a very mediocre year for us, and I gotta tell you how unfazed I was by that. Not because I don't care, just because I look at my portfolio and our companies fundamentally have done well, but the market intention was somewhere else, and therefore the market have not chosen to price my stocks appropriately, at least what I think. And you know what? That's absolutely fine with me. And that's an example of kind of applying this philosophy to your life. Now, let's talk about Epictetus, where he said, "Wealth comes from what you have." And just think about it. It's really just what is wealth? It's basically assets minus liabilities, right? You can argue that your wants are your liability, and what's left is your equity. So if you can look from income statement perspective, your wants are expressed as your expenses, right? If you if you basically want very little, and therefore because you could always do a lot more than you are. If you earn $100,000, you can always spend how much you could always have a wants for 150. And if you earn $1 million, you could always have a wants for 1.5 million. So if you just have a simple lifestyle where your wants are, you don't appreciate what you have, then your equity is going to be higher, your expenses is going to be lower than your revenues, and you always going to have things left over. Like in my case, when we chose, like, as I mentioned, live in an old house or buy used cars, that was my I taught myself to be very happy, driving a 12-year-old car, and I was absolutely fine with that, and didn't bother me because I didn't really care what people thought about my car. By the way, there was an interesting idea here too. A lot of times we link our identity to things we own.
Yes.
And I was thinking about this because let's say you buy a brand new car and people start complimenting you on this car. What are they really complimenting? All you did, you just wrote a check and might have gotten huge debt to buy this car.
Yeah.
But really, you did absolutely nothing to create that car. Like Elon Musk or Tesla engineers could be proud of Tesla, but you should not be proud of driving Tesla car. Okay, so I think one way to get there to kind of is to wonder what you have, is kind of to divorce your identity from owning material things. But this is a true story. Um, so I was looking at my so the I said all these things, but about 6 years ago, I did buy myself a new car.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was a Tesla. It was a Tesla Model 3. And it was new because I couldn't buy used. So I bought a new car. And I remember looking at my Tesla Model 3 and looking at my friend's 1-year-old Honda Accord, the next to each other. And I remember feeling this feeling of envy to him. You
Mm-hmm.
would argue why? You would ask why?
Mm-hmm.
Because he did not have to worry where he's going to park this car. He did not have to worry about the dents. And this is when I realized that we don't own things. Those things own us.
True.
And this is where I realized like how little we should really attach our identity to owning these things. Yeah, so yeah, that's my answer to that.
No, I love it. It got me really thinking and it made me laugh. I'm wondering, we started talking about childhood and upbringing, and I'm thinking of, growing up in Poland in the 80s. The stores were empty and shopping was not entertainment. And then I moved to America, and shopping is entertainment for a lot of people. And
Mhm.
it's a source of pride. And it's like, look what I have, look what I bought. And obviously, advertising marketing helps us with it too, making us believe that if we buy that thing or the other thing, then look how successful I am because of the watch that I have or the car that I have or the trip that I went on. And I think my habits were so set in stone by the time communism ended in Poland. I was 10 years old, that you could barely undo it with everything that followed because I was just set in my ways. So I've owned used cars in the past, and I totally relate to what you're saying. But to this point, I have a hard time seeing shopping as entertainment. I have a hard time with luxury goods. I feel like they have really no bearing or impact on me.
Mm.
But it's just a personal experience. I understand how other people see it differently. I think in a way it helped me save by saving, invest, and by invest, pursue also, personal success on the investment side as well. But it's funny how those things get set in stone, and they are what they are,
I
and they stay with us for the next few decades.
so it's kind of interesting. The like we are talking right now while there are fires in Los Angeles, and I was thinking how some of those people said that they lost their house, and they felt like they lost part of their life, and I gotta make sure I don't come off as a insensitive. But but I was thinking about it, like I was trying to kind of apply this to me. Like, would I like if I lost my house, and let's say I had insurance, and I just I went through all the inconvenience of living somewhere else and house being rebuilt. I mean, it would be very painful. Don't get me wrong, but I think I maybe just attaching yourself for my the only thing I would be upset if my father's paintings. Everything else I would not care. If I lost everything else in my house, I would not care.
Mm-hmm.
Just like even what's interesting. You and I grew up in this age where like our parents probably would be upset about losing the uh, frame pictures from from the childhood.
Mm-hmm.
Most pictures today I have digitized, so those memories are kind of somewhere in the Apple server somewhere. I don't know where they are. So as I think, um, yes, I think you and I were kind of. This is why I would not change much about my life, like growing up, in Soviet Union, because I think it gave me this. Again, I wouldn't want my kids to grow up in Soviet Union. I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't want other, but at the same time, I think it's an important part of who I am because of my disattachment to material things. It doesn't mean
Mm-hmm.
I don't have nice material things, but if I lose them, it's not. I'm not going to be, overly upset about it. I guess that's, yeah,
I think it's also an immigrant story, right? We both
yeah,
moved, we changed places, and the places we called home are somewhere else. And I think we have a more, or I do, detached.
I think, you know what, actually, this is you. Sorry, I to interrupt you. I think this is. You are so right. This is why I'm thinking. I'm thinking about looking. I was just thinking about what's going on in Los Angeles, etc. And this is exactly right. You and I basically lost our houses. Like I left an apartment where I lived for 18 years of my life, and we left for the most part everything behind. We
Hmm.
came here with, I don't know, 6 duffel bags. Okay, that was it. And so we packed all our belongings in those 6 duffel bags, and that's kind of, to some degree, what's happening to those people in California. You know, um, and I think this is why, like, you and I went through that already, and maybe that's what's, it's kind of shaped my perception of this, is that this disattachment from material things, because we kind of lost it.
Hmm.
But, when you and I left our respective countries.
There's some objects that have an emotional value. I'm sure about that in the house that I
Yeah,
can think of. But other than that, I've done it more than once, and I picked up and left. And I lived a couple of
yeah,
years here and left a couple of years there, and I became much more flexible about what home means. It's more about people than the place itself. I think there's a difference if it's your choice and if it happens to you, right? I think you're talking about
I think
files.
that's a great insight. No,
I
that's
think
a great
that's
insight, because we chose that. I mean, I think none of those people in California have chosen for that
no.
to happen to them. You and I have made that choice, and so I think this is where framing becomes very important, because you could, at this point, so let's think about, okay, so let's apply Stoic philosophy to this. If you, at this point, you lost your house, the only thing is up to you at this point is how you can react to this. It's difficult, don't
Right.
get me wrong. But at this point, you can either choose to have a victim mentality, this happened to me, kind of, thinking, or you can think about, okay, this has happened, I'm going to make the best out of it. What are the best decisions I can make? And you
Hmm.
can, so, I think that's probably the right approach here.
Vitaliy, I think it's a great way to transition to another question that I have, and it's about pain. And you write in your book that investing is intellectually engaging, financially rewarding, but it also can bring pain. And I
Mhm.
think it's a fascinating aspect of it. You write about pain in investing, that it can be not just emotional, but almost physical pain
Mhm.
associated with investing. Can you take us back to the experience you
Yeah.
share in the book?
Okay, so I'm gonna do something different. Okay, well, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm not walking away from this question. Okay, but which means what do I do? I'm gonna answer it, and I'm gonna
Hmm.
ask the listeners to go to the chapter in the book and to read the answer I provide in the book, because there is no way I can do it better than I did in the book. But I'm gonna give
Perfect.
you a different answer. So kind of, so yeah. So the investing could be incredibly, incredibly painful,
Hmm.
especially if if it's your obsession, because
Hmm.
it's very difficult for that not to become part of your identity.
Right.
And if you are going through a difficult time and the market is up and you are down, and this, and you're basically, you feel like you're failing it at your identity. It's kind of
Hmm.
at the core of who you are. And here's where I'm going to pivot. So in the book, I actually have a great example of, my personal example, how I went through that, and I give you a framework of how to go through this. But I'm going to introduce a new framework right now. I'm going to talk about it differently. Nassim Taleb has this concept. He wrote this incredible book called Anti-Fragile,
Hmm.
and he has these 3 concepts. He has something can be fragile,
Hmm.
something, I drop this cup, it breaks, it's fragile. Something that's resilient, if I drop this cup and it's rubber, it just drops and nothing happens. It doesn't change. So
Yep.
the stress that has no impact on it. And then it's anti-fragile. If I
Mm.
drop this cup and it learns how to fall next time, it doesn't break, how to fall in a way that is, that it doesn't bound us. I don't know. It changes, it adapts and becomes better from this.
Mm-hmm.
Then it becomes anti-fragile. So what I wrote in the book will teach you how not to be fragile, how to be at least resilient.
Mm-hmm.
How, in other words, when you go through this difficult time, you want to make sure that you come out and you are as at least the same person that, and not broken person when you entered. But here I want to talk about resilience. I think not being just resilient, become anti-fragile. I think when you go through difficult time in investing, I think it's an important opportunity for you to become anti-fragile, to become better. Because
Mm-hmm.
what happens when you go through difficult time, that pain, what it does, it actually it exposes your weaknesses. It exposes the even little flaws in your process. And if you don't have a victim mentality, but if you just look at it as not this happened to me, like this has been inflicted on me, but as you look at it as an opportunity to learn, and it's difficult, don't get me wrong, it's difficult, and you start looking at your process and you try to improve it.
Yeah.
And you say, okay, well, I'll give an example. Like for me, when I went through 2015, a very painful market for me, it made me a much better investor because after that, quality became absolute. Meaning, before that, I, as any value investor, went to buy things that are cheap, and a lot of times the cheapness was very expensive because it came at the expense of quality.
Mm-hmm.
The 2015 market basically, taught me that my emotional intelligence is at the lowest when I own the low quality stocks, and basically made quality absolute for us. So when I look at a company and I find that there's something about it makes it low quality, I just move out. If
Mm-hmm.
there's a management, I just looked at the company that looked like literally 30 cent dollar, like incredibly cheap. Um, but the management was really looked very questionable. It was such an easy decision for me to move out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that, and I would argue that pain of 2015 has made me a better investor. Let me give you another example. Ben Graham, the father of value investor,
Mm-hmm.
he wrote his book, the Intelligent Investor. I think the secret analysis was first, or whatever. After he lost like bulk of his wealth in 1929 crash,
Right.
so he didn't let this crash to go to waste. He learned from it, and that made him a better investor.
Mm-hmm.
So I would argue that whenever you go through a difficult time, this is an opportunity for you to examine what went wrong. By the way, sometimes there will be absolutely nothing you've done. Sometimes it could be just randomness, or sometimes it's just the market doesn't, wants to look at different type of stocks. But a lot of times it's an opportunity for us to improve and become anti-fragile. And this is what I encourage everybody who is listening and viewing this podcast to do, is look at this as an opportunity to improve. Now, so that's kind of a next step. First, you want to become uh, resilient, and then you want to improve. Uh, so I would argue, just read Soul in the Game or read the chapter called Pain, Upfront Investing, and there you can learn about this.
It's one of my favorite parts of the book because it's so raw and honest. And it's not glorifying investing. It says how it is. There are times when it's really, really hard. And you have your soul in it. And it will get to you. And it will be painful. And I like this idea of looking at it and thinking, what can I learn from it? How can I avoid this in the future? I actually keep a spreadsheet of companies that I've ever looked at and invested in. And I especially spent a lot of time on the ones that didn't do what they were supposed to do. So I kind of rubbed the mistakes in my face. And I want to learn why not, because I did the work. I thought I knew
Mm-hmm.
what I knew. And I think I can learn a lot of lessons from those experiences, and I don't want to hide them. I want to look at them. And I think, first of all, I'd like to avoid them in the future, but I think without that experience and practice, I think you can't grow. So pain is helpful. I want to bring up something that I was thinking about as I was listening to you, how when you manage other people's money, in my mind, I have just, and heart, I have a huge respect for the money that I manage. And I think it's a huge responsibility. It's somebody's lifetime of savings and inheritance and money they can't afford to lose. So the pain when you're managing other people's money, in my mind, is even higher than when you manage your own money, because I know that they're not in a position to make it back if we permanently lose that capital. And it's something that I remind myself of every single time, that I'm responsible for somebody's livelihood.
So the way I think you brought up is such a great point. What I what I really detest about traditional Wall Street, and I'm generalizing right now, is that if you wanted to build a large investment firm, what you would do, you would create 10 different strategies. You would take 10 different risks, and eight of them would blow up. So somebody, when I say this, somebody will lose money,
Right.
and two will work out, and that's what you will market.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you're gonna have this couple of funds that become huge, and what you won't see is that those people that lost the life savings in
Right.
the 8 other parts. Okay,
Right.
so that's something I would never want to do. So you and I have this in common, is that we manage money. Like we manage a lot of times, I manage all my clients' whole life savings,
Mm-hmm.
and so they basically traded that time for that money to create it. And now I want to make sure that I'm going to create enough money so it can buy them time in the future. And I have to manage it in a way that over the last 15 years, I would argue the world we lived in was not necessarily the world we're going to see in the next 15 years. It's going to be, it's probably going to be a lot less benign.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to create a portfolio that will survive anything that's kind of economy throws at it. And so when you start thinking this way, you're going to make it very different. If you start thinking about, okay, I'm investing capital that is replaceable, that you use in your words, then you're going to be making very different investment decisions. Then
Right.
realize finishing the race is actually more important than finishing the race. To finish the race first, you have to finish it.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, you're going to be making very, very different investment decisions. And you are right. It's an incredible responsibility. Let me give you I'm going back to the pain a little bit. One thing I learned from my experience is that I need to have an oasis in my life
Mm-hmm.
where I can just be investment free, like where I can go there and not think about stock market. And once I realized it, I basically made a rule that I never, ever, ever can I manage money of my friends, because I want to have that part of my life where I go through this difficult time and I can still go for beers with my friends and not think about the stock market. Because if like say I manage money with my friends and I'm at work and it's painful, and then after work at 6 o'clock we go to the bar to have beers, and it's the stock market is just kind of I'm taking the stock market with me because now I'm talking to my friends whose money I'm managing. So that was an instrumental decision for me, which is
Mm-hmm.
not very typical. A lot of times when people start investment firms, they're kind of forced to go to friends and family.
Mm-hmm.
I was lucky that we were the size where I could make the choice of not taking friends' money and family money. Even though I manage my money for my kids and my wife and my brother, but
Mm-hmm.
outside of that, I don't buy any money. I don't manage any money for my friends.
No, I think it's a great point to create that kind of space for you to be outside of whatever is happening at work. And the point about, respect and responsibility. And you're right that a lot of Wall Street firms don't really care whose money it is. For me, it's the essence of the conversation. What kind of money are we talking about, and what this money means to you, and what kind of purpose it has in your life, how it came about. I have 1,000 questions with new clients about that, so I can understand what kind of emotional charge there is even around that money, and how important
Actually,
it
no, I
is to
just
you.
realized this because I just came back from Las Vegas on the Consumer Electronics show. I just realized there's a lot of games there in the casinos.
Right.
And if you think about this is what Wall Street does, it basically makes games for people to play. It creates
Yeah.
product as if it was games in a casino. So if you want to buy 3x levered Tesla, we have a product for you. And and that's and I now I believe in a free market, and I believe that people should have the right to lose their own money.
It's
And
beautifully
but I would
put.
not. What?
It's beautifully put. People should have the right to lose their money.
But at the same time, I would not want to be in the business where I
Of course.
create these products. Uh, I would not. If I did this, I would not have sold the game.
Vitaliy, related to that, in your book, when I was reading it, I was thinking that business, investing, life, it's about people. And I just want to
Mhm.
bring up one story from the book that both made me laugh and I think reminded me of something important. So apparently when you hire somebody, you take them to lunch, you have the waiter
Mm.
mess up their order, and you watch what happens because you want to learn more about that person. Can you tell the
Yeah.
audience
So
why
the
you do
only
that?
problem is that I can only do this once because once I wrote about this, I can't do this anymore. Really, we did do this, but let me explain you like the ethos behind it. I I have this privilege of creating a firm that I want to come to every day.
Mm-hmm.
It's so people become very important. Now, it's not just like when I hire people, we're looking for competence. And I want to make sure we do great research, we service our clients for all these things. But I also want to be around people who are good people. Let me put it this way. Now, the reason it's important how you treat your waiter, because at that moment in time, you're in a higher social structure than
Right.
the waiter. You can
Mm-hmm.
argue about the social structure thing, but that person is working for you at that moment, and you are the employer at that moment in time because you're the one who's going to be living the tip.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, just okay. So if you treat somebody who is below your social structure poorly, that means that you will be treating other employees who may be below you, who may be reporting to you poorly as well. And that's going to create a toxic work environment. And
Mm-hmm.
remember, I want to keep coming to the office and I want to like this is like I spend 8-10 hours a day in this office, so I want to enjoy spending time here, and I want to be enjoy communicating with people around me. That's number one. Number two, and I hate to use this word because it's been so overused, but I truly believe in it. Teams. I truly believe in it. Teamwork. And usually, the reason I don't like this term because usually there's a poster, something about talks about whenever somebody turned into a poster, they killed it. But this is how I look at this. Everybody has their strengths and weaknesses. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of times the weaknesses are just the other side of the strength. I'll give you an example. When somebody is very creative, the other side of that's the strength. The
Mm-hmm.
weakness a lot of times is being detail oriented.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now my job is to make sure that I have the right person in the right job. The person with creative skills is in the creative job.
Right.
Now that also means that I need to have another team member is trying to compensate for that weakness of. So when we work in teams, it's really we try to take our strength, just bring our strength, and other team members kind of to offset our weaknesses. And what I found is that like there's actually interesting similarity between being a boss and being a parent. It's a I gotta The what you find about kids actually pay attention to not what you say, but what you do.
Right.
I can be talking about teamwork, and me as a boss not be the team player.
Hmm.
The usually culture is created from the top, and so I am obsessed about if somebody needs help, and I have the skill to help them, I will help them, and I'm not gonna make them feel like I'm taking my precious time to help them. No, because I want others to see that I'm doing this,
Mm-hmm.
and I so kind of live by example. That's what it means. And this actually the lesson from this translates to investing because when I became a CEO of IMA, I realized how important people are. And I got to tell you, today, when we analyze companies, we probably spend as much time analyzing management as we spend on citing balance sheets. Probably even
Right.
more time, but it's more difficult to analyze management. Uh, People for us and culture are paramount. And a lot of times you look for little cues. Like my friend Ben says, a lot of times little things tell you a lot about big things.
Mm-hmm.
And like when you talk, we went. I remember one time we went to visit a company in the corporate headquarters. Had a lot of pictures where CEO went to visit their companies, like to the different offices, and the the face of the CEO was this big, and everybody else was kind of in the background, very little. And that told me a lot about the culture of the company. Just
Right.
this little face tell you a lot about this.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I coming back to what you asked me, I think when we like one thing I can do when I hire, we we you know we try to spend time with that person before we give an offer in a social setting, just to see how they treat other people, just to see what kind of person that he or she is outside of that interview moment of 30 minutes to an hour, whatever it is. Because I
Right.
really want to make sure that life is so short, and I just and I want to work with people that are nice, good hearted people. And I tell you this is what's great about MA. I see like I have almost like this parental pride a little bit, because everybody here absolutely adores each other and they love helping each other. And I cannot tell you how proud and happy it makes me feel. And so it's kind of like, by the way, yesterday I spent, like, we went to a basketball game with three of my kids, and I looked at them and how much they love each other and how much, and I was I kind of had a similar pride.
Mm-hmm.
As a CEO here, obviously I have a lot less responsibility for my employees, but at least in choosing who we hire, I have the choice. And how I, kind of would encourage them and what kind of behavior I encourage, I discourage, have impact on, what we build here.
I think that it's so important to remember that the businesses and life is all about people and the kind of people you invite in your life. And I'm thinking also of clients, the kind of clients you want to work with. They'll make your life wonderful or the opposite. And the same with employees or coworkers or anybody else that enters your life. And I mean, I laughed about this method, but I think that little example, as your friend says, little things show a lot about the big things. If you pay attention, you can notice how people treat each other within a company that you're interested in investing in, and it can tell you a lot about it.
Let me tell you one of the mistakes I made, investment mistakes I made. I'm not going to mention the company because I just don't want to deduce who it was. But like one of my mistakes was when I did not sell the stock when I learned that. And I'll tell you what I'm about to learn. So this company, ex-employee sued the company. And in the lawsuit, this little piece of information came out. When I read it, I should have sold the stock, but I didn't. And I ended up losing a good chunk of money on that because for the reasons you'll see. But the lawsuit basically said that this employee was talking about how he went to dinner with CEO, and CEO's assistant was cutting his steak while he was eating. So that was he was talking to CEO. His CEO assistant was basically doing cutting the steak. And then CEO ate the steak. And after I read that, I should have sold the stock because that is a behavior of somebody who thinks of himself as a king, basically, as a person who is not going to be who becomes like kind of builds a company. It's a kind of a dictator in the company, and that's going to be very unhealthy environment. By the way, after a while, look, when this company struggled, all the lesson like what I learned was indicative of this behavior. Basically, he did not listen to anybody else. He was responsible for like I managed every single decision, etc. So that's a case where a little thing told me so much about the company. Just this little thing, and I did not react on it. I did not react on this. This was a mistake. But if I
Mm.
did, I would have saved a lot of money. So that was a great lesson for me to kind of to pay attention to little things.
Yeah, it's fascinating to get to know the people that are running the businesses, and those little things can tell us a lot. Vitaly, I want to ask you a big picture question about investing as a pursuit. Because you share in your book, you say investing is a very non-linear endeavor, not an idea
Mhm.
per hour profession. And then you say, if we focused, we could work 2 days a week. And then you write, we don't have to spend our creative time in the four walls of an office. Tell me more about this image of investing as a practice that you have in your mind that's
Look,
non-linear, not necessarily in an office. And maybe there's only 2 days a week that you can really produce the results, the outcomes that you want to look for.
so let me give you an example, real example. Right now, you and I, like I'm sitting in what I call my cave. Okay, and this the next say where this office is. So I have another office next door, which has a desk and two big computer screens, and this is where I build my spreadsheets, etc. And this is what I talk on. This place right here is basically this laptop I'm talking to you on doesn't have anything installed but this, and usually it's off. You know, usually it's not on. And I sit in the chair behind me, and I spend probably 3 or 4 hours a day reading. This is my way of kind of creating a place, kind of my digital oasis where I put my headphones on and I read. And I have this, and I have this iPad right here, and I have my 10Ks and earnings calls, etc. And this is basically my oasis for thinking. Now, so the yes, the you so the let's go back to the linearity of this. A lot of our thinking today about work came from Henry Ford. Because what Henry Ford did, he basically revolutionized assembly work, right? In the past, he created assembly work where you basically showed up, he did a certain task, and by you just focus on the certain task, just that task, you became very good at that. And you could have actually gone into creative coma because all you had to do is just take a part from here to put it here,
Yeah.
but that mentality kind of went from a factory to the offices.
Mm-hmm.
The corporate America expects to show up at 8 o'clock, work until 12, punch out for whatever 30 minutes or an hour, punch in back again. In fact, I would argue. Let me step back a little bit. That what happened was an intermediate step that I missed. We went from Ford factory to fast food, then to office. Because if you think about fast food, that's exactly what it is. It's a factory. And a lot of people who went into corporate offices actually did make, very few of them work in the factory, but a lot of them did work at the fast food as a teenager or something.
True. Mm-hmm.
So, and that conditioned our thinking about what to do in a corporate environment. Well, investment is not that, right? Investment is a creative activity. Now, there are two extremes to that. If you don't do anything, you can't really do not do anything and be a good investor. But at the same time, how much time you spend in this sterile environment has absolutely no relationship with your outcome. because a lot of thinking actually happens. Like, when I went to CES, Computer Electronics Show, was I working, or I was not in the office. Um, Now I can be. So the reason what's great about this room, it's basically has my father's paintings around it.
Hmm.
It has a very non-sterile environment that stimulates my thinking. So my office is a little bit more sterile than this, but not that much more sterile. Um, the point I'm trying to make is that how much time you spend looking at 10K has very little correlation with your outcome. So you can spend 2 or 3 hours a week doing this, and spend the rest of the time walking in the park and thinking about it. It doesn't matter where ideas come from. Great ideas could come in the shower. Great ideas could come to you when I walk in a consumer electronics show and talking to somebody about whatever. So not like think my message to listener would be, don't have a guilt that you haven't sat in the sterile office. First of all, you don't have to sit in the sterile office. You can take this thank you and go to Starbucks or wherever, and or to the park and read this if you want to do this. So it doesn't
Hmm.
have to be. Um, Also, it's not how much you do this. It's the quality. It's the quality of your work that matters really. And being exposed to randomness, I would argue, is as important. That's why I think travel is so important, because the insight I gave you about friends to be very difficult. I mean, it's not impossible, but it would be very difficult for me to get to this insight if I didn't travel maybe 20 or 30% of the time, or maybe 20% of my life, it's traveling. So these insights come from interaction in the real world. And this is actually the key, because you invest not in spreadsheets. You invest in companies that live in the real world. So
Right.
you have to understand that real world. And the best way to understand it is to be there. Uh, and you will learn these little things that you have no idea. And this is the big great thing about knowledge, as you talked about, right? As you and I discussed, you have no idea when that insight is going to matter.
No, I love the sound of it, and I agree with you. And there's so many moments, and I wrote about it and talked about it in the past, how ideas come to me not at the desk. And I just have to be out and about in motion. Even if I read something, I feel like it gets processed when I'm walking. And there are studies and research and books about it, how the people that we admire of the past, you mentioned Carl Jung and others, that they work 2 3 hours or 3 4 hours a day, and then they would go on long walks. And I know you have that practice too, because
Hmm.
that's how we operate. And investing is a peculiar endeavor, maybe creative in more ways than we're willing to accept. That it doesn't happen in a mechanical way, that I read 100 pages more than you and that makes me a better investor. It doesn't work that way. Or I read the 10K one more time than you. It doesn't work that way. And that's the catch.
Actually, so let me take it a step further. So the Warren Buffett's one of his right hand man is Dot Combs, and he said that he reads 300 pages a day.
Hmm.
Now, I don't want to I don't want to say anything bad about the tempo or value investing, but first of all, reading 300 pages a day, I'm not sure it's a possible. But even if it is possible, well, and I would say possible when he runs like 5 other companies, this kind of thing. Um, I would argue the effectiveness of this, and this point is very important. Receiving information is one thing, but if you don't process it, it's really you received something, it went through and went to garbage, because you also need time to process information. This is why I used to listen to 3 4 5 podcasts a day. Now I limit myself to maybe one podcast a day, because I give myself time to actually think about what I listen to and process it. And now, in the same time, now I became a lot more, um, discerning about what podcasts I listen to, because I realized there's always something, like like if I can listen to 5 podcasts a day versus 25, I have to be a lot more careful,
Right.
and um, therefore, but I also realize I need to give myself time to process it. So when I listen to podcasts, a lot of times I just write something down. Okay, I got to think about this. Oh, this is an interesting idea, and then I actually give myself time to think about it. Walking in the park is a great place to do this because you are exposed to very different environment. So right now, it's even even this very kind of beautiful office. There's a lot of art. It's still every single subject here is basically has parallel lines, right? Every frame here has a parallel line. There's this windows, this desk, this computer. Now, when you go out to the park, almost with the exception of benches, maybe none of the objects are there. Have parallel lines. It's trees are not symmetrical. And what it does, I think, it takes your mind and it takes your thinking and puts in different rails, different paths. So yes, I would argue that um, spending time in the office, you obviously want to give yourself information to process by reading, but you also got to give yourself time to process it. So maybe reading 300 pages a day is not such a good idea.
I think it's about quality over quantity. If you actually can spend
Absolutely.
time, and it's interesting you bring it up because I reread many books in my life, and I realized that reading them the second time or giving them more attention allows me to see things that I missed the first time. And it's the same with any kind of information or a podcast or a conversation. I listen to it again and I notice things. So to me, it's not that I have listened to 100 podcasts this month. No, I listened to one or two that really left me with something that's meaningful to me. And I'm not going to forget it for a while. And it's
Let's go.
imprinted.
Let me double click on what you said because I agree with you so much. When you read something that is very good for the second time, there are 3 things happen. Number one, you are a different person at this
Yeah,
point in time because you had new experiences in between. Number one. Number two, when you read it for the first time, like the curiosity was part of the reading, and the curiosity is kind of the engine that puts you for. It kind of pushes you. You want to see what's going to happen next, and therefore you might have missed things for that reason. So when you read the second time, you know how the movie is going to end. For the most
right.
part, you know how it's going to end. Therefore, you probably paying a little bit more attention. And third, when you were reading, you could have gotten distracted at that moment. And you might have missed that insight. This is why I agree with you so much. I think rereading good books, you know, is so important. And I do this all the time.
Somebody shared with me this metaphor of books and flying planes. And I fly small planes, so it really spoke to me. And he said how the first time you read the book, it's like going to an airport you don't know. You just fly over and you look around. Where are the trees? Where's the wind? You just want to figure out the area. Then you fly
So
again and you say, okay, that's the runway I'm going to take. And then you come back the third time and you're going to land. And I feel like with books, it's the same. I read it, especially books that I think are very, very important to me. The first time I read it, I just want to know the scope. What are we talking about? And the second time, I can pay attention. And the third time, I really walk away with something that is life changing. And that wouldn't be possible if I just skim through it because I'm trying to get some sort of a record of pages per day. I just need more time.
yeah, I think this is why whenever people brag about how many books they've read, I actually have a problem with that because they focus on the check mark. They okay. It's a good thing that I would rather somebody who read 150 books than somebody who has not read a single book. Don't get me wrong. But I would argue, given choice, I would rather have somebody read 15 books, but great books, and read them well and understood it, than somebody who gulped 150 books and really. It's almost like uh, like somebody who watched 150 TikTok videos basically, and just kind of Yeah, by the time you're done, you don't remember it. So the but the problem is when you read something just to have a check mark that you have, it's a different mindset, and
Mm-hmm.
therefore you're not reading to learn. You're reading to get to the next page, and therefore you're not as present, and you're absorbing information as well.
Vitali, I have to ask you about music. In a lot of your writing, you bring up music, and you inspired me to listen to classical music all over again. And I used to listen to it more, and I've been actually writing more while listening because of you.
What are you listening to when you write?
I like Chopin. I grew up with a
Oh
lot of
well, I
Chopin
mean, yeah,
stuff, but
that was a such a I could have I didn't have to do mental kind of to guess that, but okay.
well, I used to go to summer concerts at his home outside of Warsaw, and the windows were open, and usually a student from the university would come and play, and people would sit on the grass. It was a whole like a holistic experience, not just
Mm.
the music,
You
but
ne-
it's summer, and you can smell the flowers, and there's music, and there's a community getting together and listening to his music, and so that's why I listen to Chopin quite a few, and you bring him up in your writing. But tell me more about music in your life. And I know that your parents wanted you to pick up an instrument at some point, but music stayed with you either way. Tell me about it.
Yeah, no, I was lucky that my older brothers got abused by my parents because they forced them to go to musical school, and I think my brothers hated that, and I think it's kind of their musical excursion ended when my brothers pulled the keys literally out of piano. So that's I think my parents got the message. So my parents never really forced me to, I didn't want to study piano or violin when I was little, and they didn't force me into it. But I fell in love with classical music like in a very early age. I remember when I was 16, 17 years old, I was listening to, at that time, mostly to classical music, maybe at least 50-50 classical music. And today, 90% of music I listen to is maybe classical music. It doesn't mean that you should not be listening to other music. It's just what my tastes are. Um, so I could tell you stories why I listen to it, but really the honest truth is I really love it.
Mm-hmm.
I now think about this. I love writing. I love listening to classical music. I can listen to while I write. I can listen to classical music, and I drink coffee at the same time anymore. So it's like all this. Like I love coffee as well. So it's kind of that's all it is really. Now there are studies, and there are always studies, that show that while you're listening to music and you're doing something creative, it actually activates both of your left part and right part of your brain at the same time.
Mm.
So it improves your creativity just while you write. I mean, while you do something creative. Now, that effect goes away very quickly when you stop listening to music. So now what's interesting about this is that if you try to, let's say if I when I write, if I try to listen to music with words, it actually becomes counterproductive because what happens, your brain starts processing these words, and actually that's consumes processing power, and it actually makes you less creative. So you have to find the music that works for you, which is very individual experience. Um, but I listen to, so I don't listen to music with words unless it's operas, and they usually said in the language I don't understand. So to me, it's just a sound. So I'm not, my brain is not trying to process French because I don't know it. Um, I don't listen to anything that's very heavy on violins, just
Mm-hmm.
for reasons I can't explain. The way I love violin concertos, just not while I'm writing. Um, and it just I love classical music, and I like now I also write about it, and the reason I write about this because I wanted to learn more about it, really. And when you write about this, now you need to read more about it, and so read, it's becomes kind of a flywheel. Like because I need to write, I need to read, and and it gets me more interested in etc. Um, and on my website, if you go to my favorite classical.com, I have a playlist that basically, I would argue, if you just want to, if you don't know much about classical music, and much classical music is a huge, there, I don't know how many pieces there are, millions probably. But if you want to be introduced to very accessible piece of music, go to my favorite classical.com, and there is at the top there's a playlist I created. So you can listen to it, and this is a music I promise you're gonna love, just because I created that originally, I think, for my kids,
Hmm.
and then now just kept sharing it with the world.
That's a great recommendation. There's something special about that kind of music, and I'm glad you bring it up. My wife plays the harp, so and she was playing before we started recording, and I was listening to her as I was working. So there's always music in the house, and she grew up with music in the house too, with her brothers and father and mother. So there's music present in our lives,
Oh, this is so lucky.
and there's something about the harp because it's such a beautiful instrument, and we have two of those. We have the big one, and then we have a travel size one, and I don't know, there's something very soothing about it. And she always asks, do you want to put in headphones? And I said, no, I want to listen. Like it's becomes part of my work routine, and I'm listening to her
Actually, I have a
play.
question for you. That's how does actually I always and maybe you can answer the question for me. How does she travel with that? Like if she
So we have the full size one, which is a little
uh,
shorter than me, and that one doesn't travel. But we have a two-sided, two strings on both sides. And that's a
uh,
travel size. That's we barely get away with it as carry on. I think people just
okay,
smile and let us in. But that one is lighter, and
uh,
it sits in your lap, so it's a smaller one. And it was custom made by somebody in Canada for her, and there are not too many of those out there from what I know, and you have to relearn quite a bit because you're playing on both sides.
uh,
One thing I'll tell you, what part I play in the whole thing is that now and then the strings break and I have to replace them, and the smallest ones are the hardest ones to replace, and it takes a
those
lot of
things.
patience and calm and discipline to weave them through and put in a new one. So that's the part that I play in her instrument maintenance. And they do break, unfortunately. Humidity, cold, warm, the weather changes, and they do break. So that's our experience with the harp. Vitaliy, I have one last question for you. I could keep you here all day. I want to ask you about the definition of success. I kind of have a hint of where you're going to take it, but I'm very curious.
That is such a great question, and I there are so many ways to answer this. One thing, it's not as some kind of so when we usually think of success in the United States, if we think of financial success, that's and I think we are conditioned to think this way because we have Forbes 400 lists, and we always talk about this person has this much money, etc. To me, success is a kind of it's multidimensional. It comes from, number one, having good relationships with people, these important people in your life. If you have that, you already probably covered a lot of it. Another thing is to have control over your day. I mean, to me, that's a very important part. Like independence, it's a control over time. To me, that's part of the success. And this is why I want to give my employees here uh, kind of, I want to empower them to have control. I don't micromanage them. I give them uh, kind of a canvas to paint on, so they feel like they could be successful, and give them agency. Um, so I think relationships and independence, like kind of those are the things that come to mind, right away. Um, that's yeah. So and this is what I try to be a good friend, good husband, good son, good, kind of all those things to a good parent, and I think at the end of the day, it's kind of relationships probably to me. If I think this now, I'm going to be stealing from Warren Buffett, but he said something along the lines. if you live a life where you have a lot of people who would hide you, you know, if somebody came for you, then you had a successful life. So that's my very non-eloquent answer to the question.
No, I love the sound of that. And it's really about people. We talked about people quite a bit, I think. The kind of people you have in your life, the kind of people that want to be in your life. I think that's a huge win. And everything else kind of follows.